next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
How's it going, everybody? And welcome back. Man, have we been lucky. Extremely awesome guests. Show after show the last few weeks. We're just blessed here. You know, call it divine intervention, whatever it may be. And tonight's show is not going to be any different. This is the Alpha Warrior Show. I am your host, Alpha, you guys. 9/11. Do you know what happened? Have you researched what happened? You're going to get some information tonight that I guarantee you when you walk away, if it's the first time you've heard it, it may have a huge impact on your life. You guys know why 9/11 was so important to me. We'll get into that when we get into the show. But first, let me get to two quick sponsors because streaming ain't free and I got to keep the lights on. So first on deck, you guys, Goldco, protecting your investments with gold and silver made simple. ALPHALikesGold.com. Diversification, you guys. If you watch my show, you know how I feel about our government and our financial system. Not a lot of trust there. So it's no secret that I'm a big believer in diversifying your money with precious metals like gold and silver. But when it comes to buying precious metals, you need the right company in your corner. And that's why I've partnered up with the top-rated precious metal company, Goldco, because reputation matters. Goldco is a 6-time 5,000 winner for 2022 Company of the Year. And they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver when you open up a qualified IRA account. This is your opportunity to protect yourself from our out of control, very corrupt government. Don't pass it up. Grab your phone, go to your keyboard, whatever it is you need to get the job done and take action today. At a bare minimum, at least arm yourself with the information and go to ALPHALikesGold.com. And then our last commercial, and then we're commercial free until the end of this show. America's favorite mustache, Mike Lindell, and I will see you guys in 60 seconds.
My Towels solved the problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
mypillow.com.
You really gotta love Mike's 80s commercial. The man has a great heart. Make sure you go support him. When you support Mike, you support me and all the other content creators he helps. So now, my guest, you guys, please welcome San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He, along with his courageous wife, Gail, continue to lead the charge toward a real investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 at richardgage911.org. And as always, you guys, the links are down in the description. So if you're just listening and watching, you don't got to pull over. Everything's saved for you, and all you got to do is click it. Let me bring on the guests you guys want to hear from today. Richard, how are you doing, sir?
Doing great. It's great to be here with you, Alpha.
No, absolutely. And, we talked a little bit pre-show, and I explained to you why, 9/11 is such a big deal to me. So I'll recap it real quick for those that are new, first-time watchers of the show. Was 2 days after 9/11 happened, I was in the recruiting office of the United States Marine Corps, where I would ultimately sign up for infantry, and then find myself in 2003 going to combat, and having been a part of some things that I wish I could forget, and other things that are just a part of war. But it all stemmed off of something that happened on that day on 9/11, which you have done phenomenal work into to find the truth. So everybody has all these questions, and I like where you want to start with Building 7, because it doesn't seem to get a whole lot of love all the time. So, take us away. Where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, this is indeed Building 7. And it was a high rise that went down on 9/11, and most architects and engineers know nothing about it. So yeah, let's share the screen, Alpha, and we'll get on it here. Because we don't want your audience to be the last to know. I know you've been talking about this here and there, but everybody doesn't know yet. I find this always to be the case, that 3 towers went down under very suspicious circumstances. And we've been talking about this in 24 different countries, about 700 times altogether. Presentations and an equal number of interviews, and yet still America is just not waking up yet about this. So we're going to change that today on the Alpha Warrior Show. I've been to conferences across the country with architects and engineers, and most of them don't know that a 3rd tower came down. I mean, this was a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states. And yet it came down, as we'll see, according to the official narrative, by normal office fires. And it was about 100 yards from the North Tower. And here it is standing just fine before as the towers had just come down. As you can see, the incredible dust clouds created there. The building stands just fine until about 5:20 in the afternoon, about 7 hours later, when this happens. And the east penthouse on the upper left comes down in an isolated event 6 seconds earlier, and then this happens. Well, what does that look like? We've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas, for instance. It comes down exactly like that. And that's the proof that we're going to be making today. First, let's listen to Shyam Sunder of NIST give us the official narrative about this building's collapse.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Well, we should look at those fires. These are the worst fires that we have photographed or videos of in this building. They're few, they're small, and they're scattered. These are big fires, right, in high rises, and not one of them has come down prior to 9/11. No steel frame, fire protected structure has ever collapsed by fire in history. So this is an unprecedented event that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is trying to convince the few people that had the attention span to listen to them that it came down by fire. We haven't lost any of these fires, fully engulfed fires, since 9/11 either. They just don't collapse. They're fireproofed with cementitious material, which keeps that steel from rising to temperatures which could cause it to fail. Let's take a look at Building 7 on the left, a series of known controlled demolitions on the right. Is there any similarity?
Wow.
Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since we've never, especially since that's the official narrative of how this building came down. It looks exactly like an explosive, and no high rise has ever collapsed due to fire in history. So we need to be looking at the features of typical controlled demolition. We're going to go through these one by one so that we can see, It seems to match all the features of controlled demolition. Beginning with feature number 1, is there a sudden onset of destruction? The building, let's listen to Dan rather.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What? What did you say, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, he's using his intuition, as we all should. And the problem is he's never stated this since 9/11. And in fact, we've never seen, with 2 exceptions, this building played on mainstream media at all. It's like it's been swept under the rug. I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. We did not receive one bulletin on this, the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. It just has been swept under the rug completely. Feature number 2, is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Let's go to West Street and take a look from there. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How hard is this to accomplish? You have to remove all of the interior columns within a fraction of a second of each other, and then followed a second later by the perimeter columns. Any deviation in that pattern at all, and the building will begin to tip over uncontrollably. And there are many examples, in fact, of failed controlled demolitions. So how does that get accomplished by these fires? Do these fires have that level of precision to remove all of the interior columns at once? Obviously not. It begins to be pretty clear here. Let's see how fast this building's coming down. In fact, physicists have determined that it came down at free fall acceleration. That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Well, how does that happen? A bowling ball has no resistance under it. This building had 40,000 tons of fireproof steel frame, moment resisting structure, extremely strong. It can't all of a sudden give up every column on at least 9 floors, because that's the number of floors that had to have been in free fall, because a third of this building's 7-second fall is documented and admitted as being in free fall by NIST after being publicly embarrassed in a conference, a press conference that they held, where they said, well, this is easily measurable, because before they were denying free fall altogether, right? Well, where did those columns go? That's what we're going to be looking at here, because we have the feature number 5, the total dismemberment of the steel structure. This is a moment resisting steel frame building. That's where columns and beams, most of them, are welded to each other very stiffly. Well, how could all of those have failed such that we have a 47-story skyscraper dropping to just in a pile about 6 stories tall? Should have been a 20-story pile. Should have been building. We should have recognized this building at the bottom of any natural collapse, like we do in these collapses by earthquakes. They fall over. We see the columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. So let's go on and see what could have happened to this building. Looking for sounds of explosions, feature number 7 in controlled demolitions. Let's listen to these witnesses. This is Daryl, a medical student interviewed on the radio that evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out.
About a second later, the bottom floor caved out and the building starts collapsing. So these witnesses are hearing explosions before the collapse of the building. Listen to Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
No doubt in his mind, nor the mind of this gentleman, Bill Rosati.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, what do the experts say? This is Danny Jowenko.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Okay, and it's very clear. Kamal Obeid, structural engineer, a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Not going to happen. How about the University of Alaska, who engaged in a 4-year, $300,000 study to determine whether NIST was correct in its assessment of this building coming down by fire? Well, this is one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Halsey, who engaged in this effort, which he put all of the structural engineering materials into the 2 different programs, SAP 2000 and Abacus. And he modeled what would fire do? What would be the effect of fire? Well, he found out that it wouldn't, he found out that, let's see, there we go. On the right is NIST's computer model, which makes no sense at all because it doesn't look anything like the video in the center of what we've been looking at regarding this building's collapse. Well, the University of Alaska said, gosh, once we fail all of the columns in the building simultaneously within a fraction of a second on the interior, and then a second or so later, the exterior columns on that floor, we can get it pretty much to look like the original video of the collapse. And that's the only way. Fire did not bring this building down, they concluded. In fact, temperature was not hot enough to cause weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion, NIST's theory, did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders, and it didn't experience a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST, but a global collapse caused by the near simultaneous failure of all of its columns. So what can do that? Well, we're going to see right now as we look at the evidence of what could have done that. Is there any evidence of ignited thermite? Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And in fact, that's exactly what has been given to us in the metallurgical examination of the steel by FEMA before NIST took this investigation over in 2002. So this is from Appendix C of the May 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report by FEMA. What do they find? Never before observed eutectic reactions causing intergranular melting, causing a solid steel girder to turn into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Guess what? Fire doesn't do this to steel. It doesn't happen. Silver dollar size holes they find in the steel. Fires, office fires don't melt steel. Rapid oxidation, sulfidation, Where did the sulfur come from? Liquid iron, that's molten iron. How hot does it need to be to melt steel? 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. How hot were these office fires? Maybe 1,000 degrees at the hottest. These were not hot office fires. The hottest office fires get typically is 1,000 or 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's less than half the temperature needed to melt steel. This is extremely important. Hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel. They don't know where this comes from. The author of the report, Jonathan Barnett, fire protection engineer, says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. There's a problem here, right? It takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel, only 2,800 degrees to melt it. And we have the evidence of evaporated steel here. This is a real problem. This is documented by UC Berkeley professor Abulhassan Astani Azal. But he doesn't know how this happened. He assumes it happened down in the pile. Well, we can tell by the temperature, by the color of molten metals like this, what its temperature is. This is a photo from the World Trade Center steel. Dripping molten metal, yellow and white hot, exceeding 2,500 degrees. There's no question about this. Nobody argues about this. They don't touch this evidence with a 10-foot pole. Is there any other evidence of ignited incendiaries in the dust itself? Well, the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, gives it to us again on a silver platter in their particle atlas put out in 2005. This is the study of the World Trade Center dust, in which they find billions of what? Previously molten, that's again 2,800 degree temperatures. Iron, where does the iron come from? Molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. And spheres, about the diameter of a human hair on average. You can see them with the naked eye. They're in all the dust samples. They don't know where they came from. They have no clue, no idea. They don't even speculate. But up to 6% of these dust samples are previously molten iron microspheres, comprising up to 4 tons of evidence in all the World Trade Center dust samples of thermite incendiaries. In fact, the EPA says, gosh, they're in all the dust samples, these previously molten iron microspheres. Let's use it to distinguish the World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. So they don't know what it is, but it's a signature component. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these previously molten iron microspheres in it. Well, where do they come from? Let's do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. And in this experiment, you have thermite, a small amount of thermite, producing thousands of what look like sparks, but what are molten iron microspheres that cool and fall in the pan. That's just because molten or aerosolized liquids like molten iron under high pressure conditions like that form themselves into spheres. That's what raindrops do. So the surface tension of small droplets. Could that be what's toasting the tops of these cars parked around the World Trade Center? Falling liquid molten iron. What else could explain in any rational scenario in this very high heat event? What could explain the toasting of those tops of those cars?
I've never even seen the pictures of those cars before.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. They're just toasted. and they light on fire also. So we have other evidence of unignited thermite in the dust. A team of 8 international scientists, led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, are sent 7 independently collected samples of this dust because people had heard about their work, and they wanted them to know, well, what's in my dust? Like Jeanette McKinley from the apartment on the right on Liberty Street, across the street from the South Tower, all their windows blew in due to the incredible explosives that we're going to be looking at. And in these dust samples, this team finds these red-gray chips. They thought they were paint at first, right? But they're attracted by a magnet. So they have a high iron content. Well, that's not paint. They get real curious, and they zoom in or do an analysis on the red layer, because that's where the iron would be. Yep, they find iron and aluminum. Iron and aluminum, the ingredients of thermite. What's that doing in these chips? This is not normal paint. So they get a nuclear microscope and zoom in 50,000 times and find what? Iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Nanoparticles, nano engineering. And this is set in a matrix, a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon, organic material, which is used in TNT, for instance, for rapid expansion, which knocks things over. That's what explosives do. Whereas incendiaries traditionally work by means of extreme heat, up to 4,000 degrees, in fact. So here it looks like there is an attempt to engineer an incendiary to become more explosive. In fact, the peer-reviewed literature of Lawrence Livermore Lab and Los Alamos Lab have done studies on this. They call it super thermite. It's been studied prior to 9/11. And when they put these chips in a differential scanning calorimeter, a fancy heater, which measures the resultant energy of an ignition, which occurs here at about 750 or 800 degrees, that's exactly what happened with the chips that the team of 8 scientists put in the scanning calorimeter. What happened? But so it's an exothermic reaction is the point here. It's a thermitic reaction. But what also happens when this goes down? We have, in fact, there it is, molten iron microspheres are created with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres that were found not only by the USGS, but R.J. Lee Group, an environmental consulting firm, and with the same chemical signature. So we know exactly where all those molten iron microspheres came from. There is no question anymore. This is called science, by the way. And what this disproves the NIST theory of how these buildings came down, as a matter of fact, and shows how they came down. See, these materials, this is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is extremely sophisticated material made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So if we can get a real investigation by some real criminal investigators who are not involved in covering up the truth, but getting to it, they would find that the red layer, just like the team of 8 international scientists found in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, the peer-reviewed 24-page paper put out in 2009, they found that the red layer is active, unreacted material, incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material because they engineered the incendiary to become more explosive. So this evidence we have already submitted in 60 exhibits to the U.S. attorney in Lower Manhattan. And we're going to be following up with the episodes of this film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. We've already filmed it. We're in post-production now and editing. And so this is an opportunity for everybody to co-produce the film because we are raising the funds needed to co-produce the film. About $25,000 needed. So yes, we're still on the ball getting this thing done, and it could get done a lot faster if we get some support. But we have to ask ourselves now, okay, that evidence for Building 7 leaves most of us in a very uncomfortable place psychologically, because that was obviously a controlled demolition, right? That's what the evidence shows. 99 to 100% of the people in 700 presentations I've given, when asked, do we need a new investigation? Is this controlled demolition? All the hands go up. So we got to ask ourselves, is it possible that we could have a similar set of features of controlled demolition in the Twin Towers? Building 7 was part of the World Trade Center. It went down on 9/11. It's part of the conspiracy of how all of this happened. So is there a web that we need to follow? Well, just look at these towers simultaneously being shown to show the similarity of their destruction. Do we have a progressive collapse as you might expect in a collapsing building? No, it looks more like a volcanic eruption. Freely flying structural steel trailed by thick white smoke clouds, which we'll get to. A geometry of fireworks. So, yeah, there's something wrong with the picture right up front, right? Let's go through it piece by piece. Is there sudden onset of destruction? Okay, let's look at the North Tower. It's standing still, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. There's no halt, no jolt, no hesitation when this upper body meets the cold, hard steel below that would arrest its downward motion. That's not happening. We'll see why. How about the South Tower? It's standing still, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. Suddenly. This is not what you would call a progressive collapse. NIST says, well, the top part was so heavy that it drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. That's their theory. It's called the crush down, crush up theory. But it suffers from Newton's third law of motion, first of all. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. It's going to look a lot different than that. But this is the subject of a peer-reviewed paper that Zdeněk Bazant from Chicago Northwestern University put forth. A very complex paper that took engineers 10 years to decode, by the way. And in it, he submitted this just 2 days after 9/11.
Whoa.
Us are in shock, right? What were you doing the 2 days after 9/11, Alpha? I know what you were doing. You told us you were getting ready to go into Afghanistan and Iraq and get those bastards that did this to us, right?
Yeah.
I was in the same place. I mean, I wasn't ready to go to war, but I felt like it. And so this guy's in his den producing the paper that remains today the key theoretical basis for NIST's column failure theory. They kind of renamed it. Well, wait a minute. As I mentioned, there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Who's going to win, the Volkswagen or the Mack truck? The Mack truck wins. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The upper, weaker, lighter part of the structure cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, intact steel, which, by the way, is weak at the top. Small steel beams like this, but they get heavier and heavier and heavier as we go down the building until midway, we're 36 inches by 16 inches, 2 inches thick, and heavier and heavier and heavier until at the bottom, we're 52 inches by 22 inches and almost solid steel. Is that Volkswagen just going to destroy this? No.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. Is it destroying it? Take a look. You tell me. The upper part, is it destroying the lower part? I'll make it easier on you. Watch the lower red line here. Is it going down? No. The upper part is being destroyed. It's telescoping in on itself. It's being destroyed itself by something else. If it were destroying the rest of the building, we'd see it. But none of the photos, none of the videos show an upper section driving the rest of the building get down. It's gone in 3 seconds, as we just saw. In fact, it looks more like the volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea in 2009 with upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. It's not a collapse. If it were a collapse, it would have destroyed this set of interior columns that remain for about 6 to 10 seconds until they also suffer some kind of explosion, which shakes the dust off them. And as they then descend frame by frame, you can see the top part of this descending frame by frame through the dust that's been shaken off of it. It's not turning to, the steel is not turning to dust as some proclaim. In fact, this crush down, crush up theory is a lie, therefore, because this steel, it doesn't take account of that steel remaining 1,000 feet in the air. So the building is being destroyed around and outside of these few remaining columns by a set of explosions, which are heard by 186 witnesses in the oral histories of the first responders recorded orally in the month after 9/11. 12,000 pages of testimony read by Professor Graham McQueen. First, he found 156. Now it's 186. We felt the ground shake. You could see the towers sway. And then it just came down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. We're going to see again and again in these witnesses, professional, expert witnesses, what their experience is telling us about the order of events. They're seeing, hearing, experiencing explosions. And then later, the building comes down. How important is that? We've been told by NIST that, no, what they're hearing is the building coming down. Not so. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building, with each popping sound, initially an orange and then a red flash that came out of the building. And then it would just go all the way around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. You ever see professional demolition where they set charges on certain floors and you hear pop, pop, pop? When I heard that friggin' noise, that's when I saw the building coming down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all 4 sides. Material shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific do these witnesses need to be? There was an explosion on the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings. Seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was. A crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors. And then there's a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yes. I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think, at that point still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? I said, no, I was there when the building exploded. Oh, you mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. They try to lead these witnesses. How many of these witnesses, Alpha, do you think that NIST included in their draft or final report on how this building came down?
I would guess zero. And it's crazy because coming from someone whose career was in investigations, witness statements are so important to painting the picture of what happened.
And they claim to have interviewed over 100 first responders. So like they missed every one of these. And there's 186 of them. Let's look at the South Tower. Does it go straight down? Go ahead.
And it's important, Richard, that people understand that these are first responder witness statements, because these are people who have the training to recognize details and remember details in chaotic situations. When a lot of people are stressed, these people are trained to listen for the specifics and the visuals. So like their witness statements are so important.
Excellent point. And it was totally ignored. And of course they were abused after that without proper medical care and financing for that. Well, feature number 3, is there a straight down symmetrical progression? Let's take a look at the South Tower. It's an anomaly. It begins to fall over, actually. In fact, it's falling 20 degrees off of the vertical. So we have asymmetrical loading from this upper section of the South Tower. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires. We have asymmetrical damage from the plane impacts. How do we get complete symmetrical damage, just like the firefighters described, all the way around the building like a belt, all these explosions? It makes no sense. That upper section should have fallen off. Let's zoom into the leading corner of this destruction and let's examine what we're seeing here. What I'm seeing is a series of about a dozen independent explosions, about every third floor or so, leading down the building, in addition to this squib, which we'll get to later, and the lowest level there. In this looped video, what we're seeing is not a nuclear weapon going off. It's not directed energy weapons. It's individually placed explosions that are easily isolated and determined and heard by the witnesses. Pop, pop, pop. So this is an incredibly important testimony to lay to rest these alternative theories that don't explain all of the evidence that we're looking at today, or any of it, actually. Feature number 4, is there isolated explosive ejections occurring? These are called squibs in the controlled demolition industry. Well, they're occurring 20 stories below, 40 stories below the zone of destruction. And these isolated explosive ejections even occur 60 stories down below. How can these possibly be explained in the official narrative? They're obviously mistimed explosions. They're not nuclear weapons and they're not directed energy weapons. On the left side of the South Tower in this looped video, you can see a dozen of them or so going off all at once. These isolated explosions. which then gives us a clue what's happening in the South Tower. Its internal rigidity, its structural steel frame is being taken apart by many more of these explosions. So it loses its rigidity and it cannot maintain that reaction against the lower, stiffer part of the structure and then fall off as we would expect. So it just sort of settles back in on itself, as we've seen in the video. Feature number 5, is there a near free fall acceleration? Well, this is documented again by physics teacher David Chandler. It's falling almost at free fall, 2/3 of free fall, 64% of free fall, meaning at least 90% of the resistance of the columns had to have been removed. Well, these are the columns in the exterior of this building. There's more steel than glass. How can it fall at free fall through 236 perimeter columns, each 14 inches by 14 inches? There's more steel here than the glass. As I mentioned, it's an incredible structure, solidly constructed. It's an incredible heat sink also. It can take a lot of heat and still persist, but ultimately it did come down by what we've seen incendiaries. Feature number 7. Let's look at the lateral ejection here. In 4 and 8 ton structural steel sections laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, landing 600 feet in every direction, impaling themselves on skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center, destroying the winter gardens of the World Financial Center 600 feet away. Again, freely flying. This is not like a banana peeling. These are independently ejected. Look at this one. It's about to hit World Trade Center 7. Back to, forward to, back to. So they're ejected laterally with a lot of force. How does gravity work? Down. What's happening here? Out. Where's that force coming from to eject it out up to 600 feet? In this case, about to hit the World Trade Center. By the way, trailing thick white smoke clouds. Well, if the ends of these columns were embedded with incendiaries, that is the only thing that can heat up a column to burning. Columns are not flammable steel columns. It's not like wood. No office fires in history, absent thermite, has done this to steel columns. We don't see this. And there's enough lateral force to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. So, by the way, if 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the footprint of these buildings, what's left to crush the building? This is nearly 3/4 of the weight of the building, the steel, 100,000 tons, at least more. It's 2/3 really. That's an incredible percentage of the steel. And yet that amount of weight was used by Zdeněk Bezant of Chicago University, Northwestern University in Chicago, by Zdeněk Bezant to prove how the lower part of the building was crushed. But if all of this steel is well outside the footprint, it was providing literally no resistance. This is pretty incredible. There's a 1,200 foot diameter of debris. The building is only 200 feet wide. The debris went well beyond the boundaries of the World Trade Center. Well, if it wasn't the steel that crushed the building, maybe it was the concrete, because we have pulverized concrete. We're going to be looking at here. We had 110 concrete floors, each of them an acre in size, 4 and 8 inches thick. an incredible system these floors were, with that concrete over metal decking and lightweight steel trusses. Well, what happened to them? We don't see them. At the bottom, there should be a pile of 110 pancakes. We see pancakes on the right in a real gravitational collapse in Mexico. We don't see that. We don't see 50 of them. We don't see 10 of them. We don't see one nearly acre-sized floor at the bottom. It is missing. Where did 110 floors go? Where's the concrete? Oh, I see it now. 90,000 tons of concrete is pulverized in midair with what must be high energy explosives, in addition to the thermite and nanothermite. 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized to 100 micron particles spread throughout lower Manhattan in these incredible concrete dust clouds, laying a blanket 3 and 4 inches thick from river to river across lower Manhattan. By the way,
you can't get that with fire.
Yeah, you can't get that with fire. And guess what? If 90,000 tons of concrete in each building is spread from river to river, what's crushing the building? It's not the concrete, and it wasn't the steel. So we're missing more than 3/4 of the weight of this building, concrete and steel. And yet all of that weight was used in this fraudulent crush down, crush up theory, which was peer reviewed and produced in the American Society of Civil Engineers Journal of Engineering Mechanics. In fact, they had to double the mass up above and decrease the column strength below by a factor of 3. It was totally rigged in favor of a collapse. It is absolute fraud on the American people. And structural engineers have missed it across the country, but not Tony Zambodi, Richard Johns, Gregory Zudolinski, who submitted their own paper, their peer-reviewed paper, refuting this work. And it was rejected as out of scope by the American Society of Civil Engineers. How is it out of scope to challenge and refute a paper that's the whole purpose of the scientific process and peer-reviewed papers and journals that publish them? Well, what about the evidence? Easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. 400 truckloads a day we have taking this material out, starting just 2 weeks after 9/11, put on the landfill and then put on barges, sent to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, "Crucial evidence that can answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately." But it didn't.
They could have even done minimal effort, because if you use the excuse, well, we just don't have the capacity to store all that evidence, you could still take samples from every lot that's going to be taken out there.
Yeah.
That at least gives you something. Like, that's completely reasonable, and they didn't even do that.
No, they didn't. They wanted to get rid of it. It had all the evidence of thermite incendiary burnings on it, as we saw from the 3 pieces that were saved and analyzed by FEMA and put in their Appendix C of the 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report. That gives us all we need to know about what happened to this steel, but we have so much more. We have all 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features with thermite of explosive controlled demolition. with incendiaries and with high energy explosives. So there's not one of these features can be accounted for by fire, as you mentioned earlier, Alpha. It let alone all of them with additional circumstantial corroborative evidence and testimony, like we've seen from the expert witnesses. This is proof of controlled demolition. And we have, since 9/11, an incredible cost that we've paid for the reaction to 9/11, the rush to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Brown University actually did quite the study. They found that the Afghanistan 20-year war cost us $14 trillion. And the post 9/11 wars altogether, because there were about 5 or 7 of them, depending on how you count it, $8 trillion, 1 million deaths, 38 million refugees and displaced, 7,000 U.S. soldiers killed in the course of combat, and many times that, 4 times that, have taken their own lives since coming back. You have a comment on that, Alpha?
That's what I was going to say. There are people still losing their lives till this day as a result of 9/11 because of the aftermath and trauma that they experienced when they went to Afghanistan or they went to Iraq. We still have service members in every single branch that are committing suicide because of that. So that's a number that is continually growing.
And why is that happening?
The stuff that we had to do and expose and saw out there, it does something to the human psyche, and not everybody is capable of surviving that, and they become victims where it's too heavy of a burden, and they do self-inflicted injuries and take their own lives because it's a burden they just can't carry.
Wow. I mean, I can't even imagine. And that cost alone exceeds these numbers of dollars. So, and this is why we have to expose this. It's not just about buildings. I mean, 3,500 architects are testifying. They signed publicly the petition demanding a new investigation based on the obvious evidence of explosive controlled demolition of these buildings. But the cost of 9/11, the false flag operation, the complete manipulation of the American people and people of the world with enough control and capital and mainstream media domination to drive many nations to war, even under circumstances in Iraq where it was obvious very quickly that Saddam Hussein had no ties to Osama bin Laden and no weapons of mass destruction, that this was all a ruse to inflict the agenda of the Project for a New American Century, a neocon think tank, who were brought in with the Bush administration, but before they were brought in, they established their goals: regional hegemony in the Middle East, a vast increase in the military budget. But they said in their paper, Rebuilding America's Defenses, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor, these goals will likely take a long, long time. And Bush wrote in his diary after the night after 9/11, today we had our new Pearl Harbor. So they tell us what they're going to do, and then they do it. And we've seen it happen again in the last 3 years with COVID and the false solution to the false problem. So I'm trying to wake up the American people to the incredible scam that's been put upon us, because once you get this, you start asking yourself, well, what else have they lied about? Turns out, yeah, they lied from beginning to end every aspect of COVID and the quote vaccine. So Gail and I, in our efforts to expose this truth, have developed a presentation on the parallels between 9/11 and COVID, because we have to reach the health freedom movement about 9/11, because it reinforces everything they're doing. Because what happened after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Authorization Act of 2012 paved the way for what they could do with COVID, with surveillance. And for instance, any of us can be arrested now without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be tortured and even assassinated, American citizens, and it's been done. So that's what the Patriot Act, et cetera, gave us. And that's what they're doing to us. And I'm thinking reaching the freedom movement about 9/11 and reaching the 9/11 truth movement about the truth about COVID, because many of them have swallowed the blue pill about COVID, and they need to wake up about that also. It's very interesting phenomena. You can be awake and alert about the scam of 9/11 and buy right into the vaccine, and many of them have taken it. So we've produced documentaries on the 9/11 side, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, with 24 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence. The movie Seven by Dylan Avery, exposing the 4-year study that the University of Alaska has done, which exposes the NIST lie. And then the 15-minute documentary just on Building 7, narrated by actor Ed Asner. All important tools in the wake-up process, all available on our website, richardgage911.org. And again, I encourage people to help us make this film, complete it, and get it distributed widely, because the truth about 9/11 is a very dark truth that we don't want to wake up to, but we have to. Sometimes the truth is painful, and it forces us at some point to draw a line in the sand. And each of us have to ask ourselves independently, where do I draw my line in the sand? Do we wait for the next 9/11, which has already happened with COVID and is happening again, starting in Gaza on October 7th, which threatens a widened war in the region, which they're trying to drag us into, and they being the deep state, the puppet masters that are pulling the strings of the Israeli government and the US government. They have to have increasing chaos in order to get the control that they need. And I have also therefore engaged in an article series, 20 articles long, about the parallels between 9/11 and Gaza. And they are numerous. We've documented 20 of them already. We can review those if we have time. But I want to encourage everybody first to speak the truth about 9/11. It's not so difficult. We may only be, for instance, 1 or 2 millimeters high compared to the deep state. We may be the first domino, but if we tell many others, then our leverage increases.
Boom.
I like that.
That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
And that's the deep state that we intend to bring down by our collective action. If each of you shares this video with just 2 people and ask them to share the Alpha Warrior podcast with 2 others, then by God, we will win, even though they seem to have all the money. They seem to have all the media. They seem to have all the guns, and they do comparatively. But guess what? There's a million times more of us than there is them. So wake up, people. It's time. Don't let your friends and relatives and neighbors be the last to know. Do something. Go ahead.
First, phenomenal work and information there, Richard. I mean, it's math and science that you don't get to ignore it. That's what we've been taught, even though we're in a part of society where it's, my truth instead of the truth. This is math and science. And through war and even law enforcement, when the fire department gets called out somewhere, we're always the first ones on scene to secure it, so the fire trucks and they can do their job. So I've had the chance to see, large homes and condos and buildings, have some really tremendous fires. Obviously nothing to the extent of the World Trade Centers, but nonetheless, you see these other structures that don't have near the sophistication or the strength of the World Trade Centers. And I've seen fires that go on for hours with wooden and very weak steel frames still very much standing and holding their structure. But it also shows that, how much of a science they have manipulation and propaganda down, because, I consider myself a fairly common sense person. And yet I bought it hook, line, and sinker to the point where I signed my life to a contract to go to the military. And why I think your work and work from others like yours is so important, because I remember, 20 plus years later when I learned the truth, and those emotions that I felt on the attack of our country, I experienced them all over again, because I realized we never really went after the people who did it. And I think as people find this truth, there's going to be a new motivation to be like, there's people, we lost Americans in that day. And then as a ripple effect in the years to come and still losing them, are we ever going to hold people accountable? And I think when people learn the truth, that not only did they did this to our country, but lied to us and used us, the motivation to have accountability, how does it get any stronger than that? And I think that's why it's so important that people go to your website, share the shows, learn these other information, support the work that you guys are doing, share this podcast, because it's the truth. And when people say, well, it was 20 years ago, it doesn't matter. Once you pull on the thread, then everything starts to unravel. And this is such a significant event, because like you said, you look at, October the 7th with Gaza and in Israel. Look at our border, look at COVID, look at all these things, especially when I went into, detective work and doing undercover work, and informants. It's psychological. That's all it is. It's all psychological stuff on a smaller scale. And I see that stuff unfolding. I see the predictive technology and stuff that they're putting in America's with movie trailers like Civil War, to get people to start accepting these phrases as a normality. Like they hate us. Like, they hate us. And we have to get to the truth. One question I have is, what's the speculation or the theory of why also Building 7?
Oh, well, there's different speculations about Building 7. People may not understand that the 23rd floor of Building 7 was the center, the emergency operations center for a major problem like running a hurricane and the response to it in the city. It had a commanding view of the city, and that floor was built up with great strength and bullet hurricane resistant windows, et cetera, et cetera. And some speculate that was where the entire operation or substantial portion of it was run from Building 7. It also had an incredible view of the Twin Towers. Now, when the first plane hit the towers, they did evacuate Building 7. and the and there were people that came into the building and heard explosions inside Building 7 before the towers were ever destroyed with the explosives. So that's important. They obviously intended to bring it down. And we also have the Securities and Exchange Commission, for instance, on the 12th and 13th floor, which lost thousands of cases, which very high, thousands of files related to hundreds of cases, very high profile cases like WorldCom and Enron, which were still going on at that time and which were fatally sabotaged by the fires, which many suspect were arson on those floors. The fires were caused in some instances by the molten iron on the ends of the columns that were ejected out of the North Tower. But they were most severe on the Securities and Exchange Commission by far, those floors. So those are a couple of thoughts about.
And if I remember correctly, I think it was either on September 12th or the 13th. Wasn't there's supposed to be a huge press conference about trillions of dollars that were missing?
Well, I don't know about that press conference after, but a press conference before 9/11, the day before 9/11, commanded by Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, he announced that $2.3 trillion was missing from the Pentagon budget. Well, it's unaccounted for over the decades. And he said, I'm going to war against this. So he must have felt compelled to admit this problem publicly so he could kind of get it off his chest a little bit. But also, on the other hand, knowing that the next day history would change and that this would all be forgotten about. There was also, people don't know this for some reason, a major biochemical attack drill going on and prepared for the day of, before 9/11. Hundreds of police officers, firefighters, all kinds of defense and other first responders in New York's Pier 92, a building that was set up and only used, huge building, thousands of people in it actually altogether. And that was for a biochemical attack drill that was scheduled to take place on September 12th. But they were in place and ready to go and take over the Emergency Operations Center that was abandoned in Building 7. So they had another place to go already set up, and that's where it was run from, the emergency operations.
How convenient. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. When they have drills, you can start to get your hackles up, because that's exactly what happened with regard to NORAD and associated Air Force and defense drills. 43 of them before 9/11, many of them on up to the day through 9/11, several of them anticipating attacks on buildings by aircraft that have been hijacked. So the radar techs of NORAD had false blips on their screen, completely confusing them, paralyzing them as to how to respond to a real world event. In fact, they're saying to each other, is this real world or is this the exercise? And others demanding the end of the exercise, which was going on all the way through all of these airplane events that morning.
My next two questions, and they kind of line up with each other's, since you guys have this understanding of demolitions and the process it goes through on a regular demolition, like the stuff we see in Vegas and some of these other clips that we have, how long does something like that need to be coordinated and planned, for that to take place? And with that being the idea, what's the, at least the concept of like how long it would take to plan something like this to take these buildings down? And then the second half of that question is, do we have any records or witnesses in the weeks or even months leading to this of just unusual construction or people present? Because I mean, I would think this is something that like is a pretty, like, not, you just don't go and secretly put like some C4 here, C4 there. I would think like this is something that's really sophisticated to put together.
Yeah. It would take months to pull an operation like this together. And it doesn't happen on the day of 9/11. For instance, in Building 7, Larry Silverstein is kind of caught with his pants down. A year later, interviewed on PBS America Rebuilds program. And he says, relative to the collapse of Building 7, I was talking to the fire commander, and there's been such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And so they gave the order to pull, and we watched the building come down. Well, pull it is the term used in controlled demolition industry. And firefighters don't pull buildings. They fight fires. They save people. And so this is a completely ludicrous exclamation. And he says later, well, I didn't mean pull the building. I meant pull the firefighters out of the building. Well, that's not how you refer to firefighters. Pull it. And the firefighters weren't even in the building. They were never allowed into the building to fight the fires. They were told it was going to come down on its own. And so they're standing around waiting and watching the fires. And sure enough, they hear explosions, and then the building comes down. So that's relevant to your question. Equally relevant is the largest elevator modernization in the world going on in the Twin Towers the 9 months prior to 9/11, which would have given operatives under this modernization, because Ace Elevator came out of nowhere to get this contract. They somehow grabbed it from Otis Elevator, who had built the elevators and had been maintaining them up to the time of this contract. And Ace Elevator has very suspicious origins, and 85 employees were in the building until the morning of the attack. And they fled. And this is a scandal documented in USA Today in March of 2001. So the hoistways only have a couple of inches, elevator hoistways of gypsum board. And so from the elevator hoistways, you can get to all of the core columns and beams in the building and set those charges. There was a number of complaints of white powder on people's desks and everywhere, coming through the ventilation system. So connecting those dots, we can make a reasonable speculation, certainly, that's how they got their access. Also, this building, by many researchers' estimates, was only a half occupied. And also, they've noted that tenants were moved around quite a bit in the building. So that would free up floors themselves, entire floors. We also have, to do such work, but we also have some research by Kevin Ryan of digwithin.net, and he documents the placement and the upgrades of fireproofing on certain floors of the building, both buildings. Interestingly, that were associated with the locations of the plane impacts, which were different on each floor. 30 floors down in the South Tower, 15 floors down or so in the North Tower. So could that have been an operation designed to not fireproof, but to lay charges or coat the beams, the underside of the floor slabs with a nanothermite mixture, which was obviously applied fluidly in a fluid application due to the multi-layers that they find on these red and gray chips. Red is one layer, gray is another. So if we try to connect these dots, we can speculate with greater reason.
Well, I mean, the elevator upgrade is just, as soon as you were mentioning that, I'm like, that is that is an extremely well planned way of doing a covert operation, if you want to, given the access to all those floors and everything you said. The last question I have, Richard, we've seen these horrific videos and images of people hanging out from these windows, atop of these buildings. I mean, with the amount of heat that they argue was present to take these buildings down. I mean, this is after some of the, the breeze flying everywhere. I mean, does that just add up? Because we've all been close to a hot barbecue or something like that. And like I said, I've been near house fires that, are nowhere near what they're saying the heat needed to be at. And I mean, you feel that from a good distance, and we see people that were on these floors. I mean, does that add up to you?
It's a complex question, actually, because there are also people jumping, 300 people jumping out of the building. And I could see heat being the source, and smoke being the source of that motivation. So perhaps there was more heat on some floors than others, because we do see, for instance, Edna Citron, a woman hanging out of the hole that the building, the airplane went into. So, yeah, I could see it both ways.
Understood. Richard, what do you need from the I know we asked them to share this, but what can they specifically do to help you continue with this work and the stuff that you're doing?
Yes, I would encourage people, one, to share this with everybody every architect and engineer that you can find, your political representatives, and everybody. That what's it gonna? I mean, this is better than just sitting on this information and doing nothing with it. Now you have the information. You're responsible. Hopefully your conscience will guide you to do something and what you can best accomplish. And emailing this link to this Alpha Warrior podcast can accomplish a whole lot, because guess what? There's 4,000 to 6,000 of you. And I can talk to you, but what if each of you can talk to and share this information with 2 or 6 or 10 or 12 other people? All of a sudden, we've reached tens of thousands of people. You can be a part of that. I mean, what are you going to do when we're living in a totalitarian nightmare because people did not share this information? And your child asks you, Daddy, what did you do about all of this? You don't want to be sitting on your thumbs at that point. You want to say, I did everything I could.
Absolutely.
And I know Alpha Warrior is doing everything he can, and I am too. So join us.
I will keep doing everything I can to help until the day that these people are held accountable. And I don't care how old they are now. The people that did this need to be held accountable. Richard, it's been an absolute honor to have you. Make sure your wife understands that we appreciate her just as much, because we know she's also behind the curtain making a lot of this work. You guys, we run this content commercial free to the end, so make sure you stick around, support the people that support this channel, and I will see you guys tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. God bless and Semper Fi, everybody.
president's former national security advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
Flynn knew exactly how the system worked. He knew exactly what the intel world had been up to. He understood its funding. They had to get rid of Flynn.
There was a moment where I just felt like I was drowning. And so I'm in there with these other political appointees. They're all supposed to go in there and tell what they believe to be the truth. What they did was they took my assessment and they wanted me to change it. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
President Obama said, but I do have one specific recommendation. Stay away from Michael Flynn. He's bad news.
Over time, instead of being pounded down below the surface of the ocean, we started to fight. I'm now above the surface.
My Towels solved the problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
MyPillow.com.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?